Welcome to Conversations with Heroes. You know, for me, you have always been a hero.
Thank you.
I love what you do. And today I want the world to know why I think you're so amazing and why I think you're a hero. If you're not comfortable answering this, but I want to know because I want this to be more of a conversation between friends. Mm-hmm. Do you know someone that was close to you that has experienced of any form of violence, or yourself for that matter? And you don't have to answer this if you're not comfortable.
No, it's fine. I thank God. I am so grateful. I have not ever been subjected to that, but I do know people that are very close to me, family members that have. Right. And for the most part, I was having a conversation with a woman a while back, and we were talking about the hidden secrets within families. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about risk factors, and we're talking about things that go, the taboo things that you don't talk about in families. And she said to me, God, where were you when I was going through? Where were you when I was being subjected to what I was being subjected to, too. And nobody saw it, nobody understood, because I didn't know how to verbalize it. Right. But you can see it, and I wish there was somebody like you around when I was going through. And this is a grown woman. Right. This is a grown woman, because a lot of times we know that adults that are in the sex trafficking industry, a lot of times they've been in the industry a long time, and it stems from previous childhood sexual trauma, physical trauma, or whatever. Of course. And so having conversations with adults who have endured as children and are now as adults still reaming and trying to rebuild their life from that. I come into contact with tons of women and men who have been subjected to physical abuse, sexual abuse, both, mm-hmm. incest, mm-hmm. and surprisingly, I knew them. But before I started doing what I was doing, I had no idea. Right. I had no idea. Right. And then once I started learning, my language started to change. And then once my language started to change, our conversation started to change. And I started saying key words. And then they started feeling safe. Right. To disclose, because I was speaking a language nobody had ever spoken to them before. Exactly. So many people are unaware of the prevalence of human trafficking. Can you explain to our viewers, an average person, what is human trafficking? So human trafficking is an umbrella. And there are so many different things that fall under human trafficking. It's not one thing. Right. And it doesn't look like one thing. Right. There's no profile for a trafficking victim. There's no profile for a trafficker, right. So human trafficking is about two things, and I teach this all the time. It's about profit and it's about exploitation. Mm-hmm. Those are the key things that it's about, profit and exploitation. Yep. So human trafficking is the buying and selling of people, a person, for the sole purpose of profiting off of that person through exploitation, whether it be by force, fraud, or coercion. Mm-hmm. And those three elements, force, fraud, or coercion, do not have to be in your face present. Mm-hmm. Those coercion can be an action. Mm-hmm. Force can be an action. Right. Fraud can be an action. Right. And people don't understand. They don't understand that because they're looking for one thing. And if you're looking for something, mm-hmm. and if it doesn't look the way you think it should look, mm-hmm. then you're gonna miss it and you're gonna dismiss it and assume that's not what it is. Right. Can you make a distinction for our viewers between domestic violence and human trafficking? Okay, so there are some instances where they do cross over. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about domestic violence, you're talking about intimate partner, because you have domestic violence, and very newly on the books is now dating violence. Yes. Yes. See, dating violence was not on the books years and years ago. It was just domestic. And it's about time. It's about time. Yes. And so with dating violence and with the statute of dating violence, it's extremely specific, because when you start talking about dating violence, you start talking about how a person has to be in a consistent, intimate relationship with a person for 6 months or more, and it has to be ongoing and all of this, and residing together. And so when you're talking about domestic violence, dating violence, and human trafficking, they can cross over, because you can have husbands that traffic their wives.
What about the Romeo pimps?
And the Romeo pimps, and that's where the dating violence comes into place, right. And that's where it's missed.
Okay, so tell us, how do the traffickers get their victims, and how do they manipulate and control their minds?
There's no one set way.
Okay.
It depends on who the victim is, because what happens is you have young girls that are trafficked, and they are controlled under gorilla pimp,
right? And
then you have girls that are trafficked, and they're under control of a Romeo pimp. Those approaches are totally different, right?
Can you make the distinction between the gorilla pimp? We already talked about the Romeo pimp. What's a gorilla pimp for our viewers?
The gorilla pimp is someone that I would prefer to deal with, in any given day over a Romeo pimp, because with the gorilla pimp, you know what you're getting.
Tell us about
every time. Okay. So the gorilla pimp is the horrible on top of horrible, the evil on top of evil, and he has no desire to hide who he is. You know from day one, he doesn't give a crap about you. It's about his money. There's punishment for breaking any kind of rule, for getting out of pocket. There is never any confusion about who he is and who you are and what you are to him. That's a gorilla pimp. He's extremely violent.
Give our viewers an example of the sorts of punishments that they receive.
Okay, so say a girl gets out of pocket, and getting out of pocket is some form, of course, of disrespect or breaking some kind of a rule, right? And so one of the punishments that girls will be subjected to is what we call classroom beatings, right? So understanding, when you're dealing with trafficking and traffickers, nothing is wasted. Mm-hmm. Everything is a teaching moment.
Right.
There's a lesson in everything, right?
Right.
So you get out of pocket, right? What'll happen is that, and it's also a way to create divisiveness. So you break a rule, right? He has about 5 girls. You break a rule, right? He's going to call in the girl that did nothing, make all of you watch, and he's gonna beat the hell out of her. Why? Why does he do that?
He's setting an example.
He's setting an example, and what else is he doing? He's creating divisiveness between the girls.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You cannot trust each other, right? Because and don't ever think that you can turn on me or you can betray me, because I'm not gonna punish you. I'm gonna punish the next person, right? So it becomes about what? It becomes about self-preservation, mm-hmm. and it becomes about survival by any means.
Right.
So if I am in fear that, because he's already shown us what he's capable of, mm-hmm. right? That's a given.
Right.
I have no reason to doubt that this person is not going to do what he says he's going to do.
Right.
So
he's proven it.
Because he's proving that everything is a teaching moment. Nothing is wasted, right?
Right.
And so what that does is that creates divisiveness among the girls. That creates an extreme level of fear, mm-hmm. among the girls. And it also, in some warped sense, creates a sense of gratefulness to him. You know why? Because if I do what he says, then he's not going to do anything to me. And I know what he's capable of. So if he spares me, guess what? I'm going to be grateful. And what do we do when we're grateful? How do we repay gratefulness? We reciprocate it by doing what? Whatever the person needs us to do, right? And so it's very, very methodical.
Right.
It's very, I talk to pimps, and I'm like, you guys are so methodical. You really clearly think outside the box. If you would just get some real jobs, you might be really, really productive citizens.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because they're not idiots.
They're sharp.
They're not idiots.
Yeah.
They just don't care about anybody else but themselves. And the majority of them that I have come into contact with, I'm not a psychiatrist, but a lot of them are sociopaths.
Of course they're sociopaths. for what they've put through these victims through.
Yeah.
Tell us an average age of a boy and a girl that are trafficked.
So the average age of entry into the sex trafficking industry for either boy or girl is anywhere between 12 to 14, right?
12 to 14.
Given their circumstances. Now that's an average. The youngest victim that I came into contact with that I was aware of when I was at the Department of Juvenile Justice was a 9-year-old girl from Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Who was sold to a gentleman by the mother.
We had a 2-year-old girl. That
Wow.
was the youngest girl that we had with No More Tears.
I had 9 was for me. But the average age that we see is 12 to 14. Why is that? Because Johns and traffickers, believe it or not, think alike. The younger the girl, the cleaner she is. She hasn't been out there that long, less likely of me contracting something. Mm-hmm. He is easier to manipulate, mm-hmm. right?
They're looking for virgins.
They're looking for virgins,
right?
And I can do whatever I want, however I want to do it, and it's going to be okay.
Right.
They can't defend themselves.
Right, exactly. So, we always talk about victims of human trafficking. Mm-hmm. Has anyone ever looked into why a trafficker chooses this path? No child wants to grow up to sell humans for sex or forced labor. Mm-hmm. What have there been any studies about the lives of traffickers, their childhoods? Where do they come from? Where does this start? Not all are sociopaths.
Right.
So what has there been any research done on the lives of traffickers?
I'm sure there has been research on Somy, but I'm not an expert on it. But what I can tell you is that there are some cases, like for instance, there was a case in Tampa some years ago where there was a gentleman that was trafficking young girls. And at his hearing, his defense lawyer asked for leniency because his dad was a trafficker and his mom was a prostitute. Right?
Right.
So that's all he knew, right? And so a lot of times, and not trying to make excuses or mitigate anything.
Of course.
But when you're talking about kids who grow up to be these certain people, let's look back. We know children do what? Children learn what they live. And then they grow up and they live out what they've learned until they're taught something different.
Right.
If I grow up in an environment where all I see are men disrespecting women, having no value of women, using women as a commodity, and I'm taught that it's okay, until someone teaches me something different, I'm going to think that that's okay, right? And so while it was absolutely ludicrous for this attorney to ask this of the court for this particular gentleman, this young man probably didn't think it, it's like, well, wait a second. This has been going on in my life forever.
Right.
Why all of a sudden is it an issue? Mm-hmm. Okay, which doesn't excuse it. Right. It doesn't excuse it because even though he grew up like that, he grew up in a society where he knew right from wrong. Right. So you knew what you were doing from wrong. But if you're not taught how to take care of yourself or provide for yourself any other way except for off of the back of somebody else, it's easier.
Why is this a lucrative business? Is it just the basic supply and demand concept?
I think it's more than that. I think that demand drives trafficking, first of all, because if you don't have someone seeking out a product, you have no reason to produce that product.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So we know that demand absolutely drives trafficking. Now, let's look at it this way. Say you're a drug dealer.
Right.
You got a brick of cocaine, right?
Right.
You cut it, you sell it, mm-hmm. It's gone.
Yeah.
A human,
reuse it.
You can sell a human
reuse
over
it.
and
Yeah.
over and
Yeah.
over and over again. So again, going back to what drives trafficking, profit and exploitation. Mm-hmm. It is easier. I mean, let's go back to the fabric of how this country was built.
Right.
Off of demarginalizing a certain group of people.
Of course.
Okay?
Right.
And profiting off of them.
Right.
Because you could.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so that's really what it's about. Exploitation, profit, and the demand that drives trafficking. Because what happens is that people have decided who's sellable and who's not.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Which I don't know who gave them that right to determine that, right?
Exactly.
But people have determined that. And we live in a country and a society that says it's okay as long as it's not anybody that it's attached to me.
Right. Absolutely. So there's so much to it to address.
Oh yeah.
It's so broad. Tell us about in which states is human trafficking the most prevalent?
Okay. So in these great 50 states, you have, all of these things that are going on, but you have in little old Florida, right?
Right.
Which is now and has been for the past several years, number 3 in the nation of human trafficking cases coming through the federal hotline. California is number 1, Texas is number 2.
Right.
Right. And so what do these these states, have in common? The diversity.
Yep.
The people coming from different walks of life. Immigrants, right? Yep. Just so many, that is the one thing that they have in common. And people who don't know the lay of the land are extremely vulnerable. Now, are immigrants trafficked more than United States citizens? In the state of Florida, no. Because if you go to the National Human Trafficking Resource webpage and hotline and you look, which was ran by Polaris, because they do an amazing job breaking these numbers down. They do an amazing job.
Yes.
And you look at those survivors that have been identified for the past 3, 4, 5 years, the numbers for the United States citizens that have been trafficked are more than those of immigrants. Because listen, it's easier to traffic somebody that you already have here.
Right. Who's being sexually abused at
home
and runs away.
Exactly.
Or who's gay and is thrown out of his household.
Exactly.
Because guess who's looking for him on the streets? The trafficker.
Exactly.
They're looking for the vulnerable and the broken.
And the vulnerable, the broken, the weak, the thrown away.
Yep. And
those that are seeking something. A pimp said one time that if he's in a mall and he sees a young woman or a group of girls, right? And he would approach them and he would give some off-base compliment. Right. Beautiful eyes, nice outfit or whatever. The young lady that looks him back in the eye, receives that compliment, smiles at him and says thank you, he walks away from her. Right? Right? The young lady that puts her head down, shies away, is extremely uncomfortable with that compliment. That's the one he continues to talk to. Yes. He continues to speak to her. Why?
Yes.
She's not used to being validated. She's not used to anyone noticing her. She's not used to anyone complimenting her at all. So he knows now, I can sell her a false definition of validation.
Absolutely.
She's going to be so grateful for me making her feel like nobody has ever made her feel before.
Give her love.
Yes.
Give her attention.
His definition of love.
Right.
His definition of validation.
Absolutely.
She's going to be so grateful. She's not going to ever want to lose that feeling. And so then what? She's going to do what? Whatever she needs to do to hold on to
wants her to
Absolutely.
Do. All right. So you and I both know, having been in this field for years, that why a victim can't call 911 and can't escape. Mm-hmm. Explain to our viewers why they can't just leave.
Well, first of all, not everybody knows that they're a victim.
Right.
There are a lot of survivors that do not identify.
Yes, and we have someone in our care that is our speaker, and she's amazing, and she didn't realize for a long time.
Yeah.
And her name is Cindy. She didn't know for a long time that she was a trafficking victim.
They don't know. I was listening to Centoya Brown, who's like one of my heroes. I was listening to She's absolutely amazing.
I want to try and get her.
Oh my gosh, if you do,
I want to try and
you better invite me, okay? Yes.
Yeah, I want to get her.
She is my hero, and she was doing an interview very, very recently, and she made the statement that, because she was trafficked for years, and she said that she didn't realize that she had been trafficked until she was in her 20s, and she heard someone talking about human trafficking and describing what human trafficking was. And it dawned, she was like, wait a second. Well, I think that's what happened to me, but I wasn't a human trafficking victim, you know, because she had been told for so many years everything that had happened to her, it had happened to her because it was like somehow her fault.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Or it was a choice that she made. And
right.
then when she's like going back and listening to the manipulative behavior, all of the coercion, the force, the violence, and the threats, and she was realized that she was a trafficking victim. So to answer your question, they do not realize that they're a victim. They don't identify as a victim. A lot of times they are very afraid or fearful of law enforcement. Right. They don't trust law enforcement.
Right. Because those are some of the clients.
Those are some of the clients, and if you have foreign victims, law enforcement is so corrupt in their countries that when they come here, they don't know the lay of the land. They have no reason to believe that law enforcement is not the same every place. Mm-hmm. And then when you're talking about Black and brown victims, because of the systematic and institutionalized racism that this country is built on, they don't trust government. Right. So who do they go to? Right. Who do they tell? Who's going to believe them? We
had a girl from Nicaragua that was brought here at the age of 16. She was trafficked in a house in Miami for 10 years. And when she tried to escape, they literally shot her parents in Nicaragua. These people don't play.
Right. Exactly.
They are doing, like, they will go through with this.
Exactly.
This is not a joke. Exactly. They don't play.
And fear plays an extreme factor.
Right.
An extreme factor in what's going on.
So who are the Johns or the buyers for that matter? Who are these people?
Okay, so statistics show that the larger purchasers and buyers of sex are American men.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So if you go back and you look at statistics, Loyola, I can't even pronounce it, Loyola University did a study. Right. On this, if you go look it up, and they talk about who buys sex, mm-hmm. right? A lot of times when you're talking about who the buyers are, you're talking about people who don't value people.
Right.
Right? And so if I don't value you,
right.
if that means that I can determine what you're worth and what you're not worth, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I victimize you in that way. And it amazes me that people who buy sex don't understand that they're victimizing people. I mean, I get why they think that, because I'm paying them. Really? Okay. So you're paying them to do something that you think they want to do. Now, why don't you have a conversation with them?
Right.
Are you afraid of what you're going to hear?
Of course.
Are you afraid that you're going to hear they don't want to be there? Are you afraid that they may ask you for help? And because what does that do? Then that makes you responsible and accountable, right?
Of course.
Exactly.
So that's why they don't want. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's people that just don't value other people.
Right. Okay. So I've read a lot about the Super Bowl and an increase in the human trafficking. Mm-hmm. Do you know if there's any truth to this?
Well, there is truth to it. Now, you have to understand the different makeups of different cities, right? So while the Super Bowl was in Atlanta, right?
Right.
And they were extremely well prepared, and they did make some, have some cases there. They were very successful.
Right.
Let's look at South Florida, man. Miami.
Right.
Right? We don't need the Super Bowl for trafficking, right?
We don't.
We have enough numbers already.
Exactly.
Add the Super Bowl on top of that, whatever goes on here, right? Miami doesn't sleep. Right. Fort Lauderdale doesn't sleep, right?
Right.
And so add Super Bowl on top of that.
So it's a times 1,000 problem.
It's a huge problem, because what happens is that people go on vacation.
Right.
People go away to events and they do things that they wouldn't normally do at home, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
What happens in Vegas stays
What happens in Miami,
yeah.
What happens in Fort Lauderdale stays there. It's the same thing.
Okay.
So for people to say, oh, it's not that big a deal, it's not that big a deal because you don't want it to be that big a deal.
Right.
But it is that big of a deal.
Of course.
Right. Especially in cities like ours, Well, we have enough trafficking numbers already.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
You bring the Super Bowl in on that, and to think and to be
It's
to
a double
delusional,
whammy.
to think that this is not going to affect the trafficking numbers, you are absolutely delusional.
Now, this is a question that I have dealt with because I've seen this happen. What if a person witnesses a child or a woman being physically or abused in a public place? What is the correct thing to do? Because I've seen a child being beaten by their parent in Walmart, and I intervened, and the woman told me to go to hell.
Of
but
course.
I was like, I'm calling the cops on you, because she was not just slapping or anything; she was like pounding the kid. So I call the cops. But what should a person do if they see something like this?
Yeah, so
Domestic violence or a child being abused?
yeah, so that's a good question, and I talk a lot about bystander intervention.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about bystander intervention, you're talking about when is it appropriate to approach, when is it, as opposed to when is it appropriate to say something.
Right.
Now that's two different things, right?
Okay.
So first things first, when I talk about bystander intervention, the first thing I talk about is making sure you're safe, right? Making sure you're safe. Don't put yourself in a position where
you can get hit.
Your life is going to be in danger, because what good are you going to be to the person that's being victimized if you're knocked out unconscious as well?
Of
You know
course.
what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it depends on the situation. So when you're talking about you seeing a child being abused, you're talking about what you said. You said something. The parent didn't.
She said it's none of your business.
Right,
Stay
right.
out of it.
Okay, great. Then the right thing to do was to call the
cops,
police,
which I
right?
did, right.
So when you're talking about like domestic violence and things like this, one of the things I teach is where you interject with your voice. Hey, what are you doing?
Right.
Why are you doing that? You address the person that's being abused. Are you okay? Do you want me to call someone? Stop hitting her. Stop hitting him, because women also abuse as well. You know what I'm saying? And so the first intervention is going to be used by way of your voice, right? After you assess the situation, okay? Because if you got this big dude, right, and he's beating on this girl, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to call the cops, you know, and you're going to let that person know, hey, stop it. I see what you're doing. I'm calling the police right now. And you stay engaged that way at a distance. At a distance. But still in eye view, so that when you're on the phone with 911, you can give a complete description of what he has on, how big he is, what the person that's being victimized has on, what you see. And so it really depends on the situation, okay? But in any given situation, the first thing is always to assess your atmosphere, the environment, because your safety is what's priority.
And that's what I wanted our viewers to understand, because we get a lot of emails asking, what can we do? Do we intervene? And that's why I wanted to know from you. Now you do this work day in and day out. Of course you get burned out. I know I do. What keeps you going, my friend?
You know what? I had to learn, Somy, over the years, because I found myself at some point resenting the survivors, because I was like, God, they need so much. You know what I'm saying? And so what happened is that was my fault, because I had failed to separate myself from the work.
You were taking it home.
I was and you can separate yourself from the work and not feel guilty about it. And I had to learn that.
And it took me a year to learn that.
It took me, it took me
a good year to learn that.
Because I felt guilty, because I was like, God, you know, geez, you know, it's always, they need so much, they're constantly pulling on me. And then I felt bad because I had these feelings, because, oh my God, you know, these people are suffering, and they've suffered, and I have not been through, and they need me, and I have not been through any of it. You know, how dare I feel that way? You know what I'm saying?
And then I had to teach myself I cannot coddle them.
I
have to make them independent. I cannot hold their hand all the time. I can provide them with all the services. I can take them grocery shopping, take them to a dentist, whatever. But I cannot coddle them, because I want them to be independent. Because why couldn't my mother, my younger brother, and I get out of that house because my father is very, very wealthy, very influential, and no one would take us in.
Right.
So my goal for No More Tears of Survivors is I need to make you independent.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that's the only way that you will succeed.
I talk to survivors all the time, and when I'm training community-based providers, and I talk about the difference between someone surviving and then thriving.
Right.
It's not the same thing.
Right.
Surviving is great. You have to survive. You need to survive. It's an amazing thing. It's fantastic. But that's only the beginning.
Right.
The hard part is the thriving.
Of course.
Being able to function after the fact, after you've endured, being able to walk in your life despite all of these horrific things that you have experienced. But sometimes, you know, people will rest in victimization if you allow them to. Mm-hmm. And, you know, shame on us if we allow people to do that. I had someone, she needed, you know, she needs to go to the doctor. I'm going to go with her,
That's right.
of course. And she said to me, well, will you call and make, no.
You make the appointment.
No, I will not.
Yes.
I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
You call, you make the appointment. These are my dates that I'm available to go with you.
Right.
You schedule the appointment and you let me know. Oh my God, Jumorrow, you'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
You want to go to the doctor? Yes. Then call and make the appointment and I'll go with you.
Because you have to teach them to be confident and do things on their own.
Yes.
That's our job.
Because they can do that, but when your humanity has been stripped away, when any and all authority that you had or thought you had over your life has been stripped away, you don't even realize it that you are consistently asking people permission to exist.
Right, exactly.
And that is so sad.
Right.
And it's really hard to get people to stand up.
Right.
To stand up in the fact that they've survived and be able to walk out of the title of victim and out of the title of survivor and into the title of thriver.
Exactly.
And in order to do that, you don't drop them, but you don't hold on too tight either, and you let them navigate their way. And when they're navigating, you've given them a map, you've given them a blueprint, but you have to let them figure out the map on their own.
Absolutely. What is your advice to parents that have teenage boys and girls about safety? What should these parents look out for? I have several interns from the age of 15 to 22. I'm always worried about them because they're on social media and, you know, they're on Instagram and they're on Facebook, and I don't know who's on the other end talking to them. In fact, one of our interns, she received this message where I want to be your sugar daddy and I'll give you $500 a month, whatever, was it a month or something like that, $700 a month or whatever. So what can you tell parents to look out for in terms of safety?
Wow, that's a loaded question because there's no profile and
Right.
because over the years in Broward County,
Right.
we have learned that children that come from love are a lot easier to control and traffic than children that don't. So the numbers in Broward County, the numbers of children that are being trafficked for community children, and community children are children that come from community, they come from parents. The numbers have superseded those numbers of those children that are in foster care or in
Right.
care that are being trafficked, because children that come from love are a lot easier to control than children that are not. Because if I can hold you hostage by the fact that you're going to be responsible for humiliating your family because I have these photos that you sent me because you thought we were dating and you sent me these photos.
Right.
You came over, you skipped school, you came over to my house, I put something in your drink, and me and 7 of my homeboys ran a train on you. I videoed it, you don't know about it. But at the time we have this conversation where I need you to do something for me, your response is going to determine whether or not I'm going to need to use this video or not, right?
Right.
And so when you're talking about parents and safety and things like this, the one thing I tell parents is you need to understand there's a difference between being your child's peer and being your child's parent.
Yes.
There's a difference.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So it's like, you know, with all of this privacy going on, you know, you have to understand, okay, this is not how it was when you were growing up.
Right.
You have to adjust with the times, right?
Right.
If you're not informed of what's going on, you're going to miss it, right?
Right.
So having access to your child's social media sites, right? Mm-hmm. Not giving your children the authority to be an adult before their time.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So I work all the time, right? I have a good job. I work all the time. My kid has everything they need. I have smaller children. So, you know, she gets out of school. She has to pick them up. She has to take them home. She has to do this. She has to do that. And so her friends, her time is spent at home watching her brothers and sisters. And so who is she talking to? She's talking to social media.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
And so that's where the majority of her time is spent. That's the majority of his time, where his time is spent, right?
Right.
And so what happens is, so I'm going to go in the inbox and I'm going to start having conversations with you. And so then we're going to start talking about your life. Right. And then we're going to start talking about how stressful your life is and how your parents are always working and how you're always stuck with your brothers and sisters.
Right.
And how you always have to do this and you always have to do that. And then I'm going to tell you know what, that sucks. You know, it sucks that your parents put that much responsibility on you. You're a kid and you should be a kid and you should be having fun. And, you know, how about we meet up?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so there's so many different avenues. You're talking about, you know, validating your kid. So when they get a fake sense or fake definition of validation, they're able to recognize that.
Of course.
You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
Having uncomfortable conversations with your children about sex, about healthy and unhealthy relationships. I tell parents all the time, you need to get out of your comfort zone. Just because you're uncomfortable talking about it does not mean your child is not going to be exposed to it.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So you have to have conversations with your children that your mother and father didn't have with you.
Right.
Well, guess what? You weren't facing those issues and these things that are trending that these kids are facing now. Right. Even with bullying. You know what I'm saying? You have to have these conversations with your children, and you have to give your children the definition of parent and peer.
Right.
You have to draw the line.
Right.
And it's not okay for your child to be mature in certain areas and then immature in other areas that would suit you.
Right. Absolutely.
If you want them to be a child, you let them be a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what happens is you start confusing them and the roles get all, you know, confused, and then they start thinking that it's okay for them to do certain things.
And they're children.
And they're children.
And their brains are not fully developed.
Right,
they
right.
are children.
Right, exactly.
Well, this has been unbelievable.
Oh, thank you.
I can't thank you enough for your time.
No.
You know, you're my
Oh,
hero.
Somy, stop it.
You are my hero. And I love you, and I really, really value and cherish our friendship. And thank you so much for being a part of this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all you do. There has never been a time, ever, since I met you, never been a time that I have called you and you have never told me no. Ever. I have never heard the word no from you, and you are the only provider. I've been doing this going on, over 20 something years. You are the only provider that has never said no to me.
Thank you.
Every time I call you, it's I can do this, okay, or I have this, and what do you need? Every single time. You don't understand how important that is to someone who is in a position where they literally have someone's life in their hands.
Right.
And it's so, so, so important. And I thank you for being genuine. I thank you for not doing this for fame, for fashion, or for glory. I thank you for doing it because you have an enormous love for people and humanity. And thank you so much. And you're just a sweetheart. I just love you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.